Welcome to the Boma Studio, where we discuss current burning issues with leading voices from around the world. I'm Ralph Talmont, and this is a Boma Poland production. People are generally useless at understanding complex systems. We find it hard to see the context of what is in front of us. Seeing the relationships between interlocking virtual entities is particularly hard. And if you do not take the time to study what is happening and how your life is affected by such interlocking systems, those digital technologies will be actually invisible to you. That is a reality to which we need to face up. And to help us see some of the issues with a little more clarity, perhaps, is one of Europe's leading privacy advocates, Katarzyna Szymielewicz, who is the co-founder of the Panoptykon Foundation. She's a lawyer, and she also advises state and EU bodies on privacy and data protection. Katarzyna, welcome to our Boma.
Thank you for this kind introduction. Thank you for having me here.
It seems to me that privacy is often, if not usually, tilted in favor of the state. The assumption is that we have to protect it, while public administration has access to it simply because we exist. This has been problematic in analog times already, and in a digital world, that is an entirely new kind of game, and it's not just state actors who are involved. Who is watching the watchers?
Us. Certainly we are at Panoptykon and other digital organizations fighting for digital rights. We are trying to play this watchdog role, but needless to say, this is very challenging when you are a grassroots, often self-funded or crowd-funded entity without real power to access data, to demand data, to do control checks on those with real power. And by those with real power, I mean both public entities and increasingly private actors. Actually, it would be very difficult for me to make judgment on what is more challenging these days, checking what happens inside of public administration when it comes to the use of data, or checking what happens inside private entities like big internet platforms, for example. So both these areas are extremely challenging. It wouldn't be fair to say, of course, that it's only the role of civil society. I wish we lived in the world where this is primarily the role of specialized public bodies, like data protection authorities, who have these powers, at least on the paper, to go inside, check, verify what's going on. But in practice, what we observe, not only in Poland, in many other countries, these public bodies, for political reasons, for organizations' reasons, for the reason of budgetary constraints, not necessarily play that role to the extent we would expect. So it means that we end up as civil society, as civic media, as investigative journalists in this strange position where we try to play watchdog role, and we do it. We do it as well as possible.
How many such watchdogs are there in Europe and around the world, such as your organization?
Panoptykon is part of a much bigger network called European Digital Rights. That network itself includes more than 30 active members. I wouldn't say all of them play watchdog role. Some of them are more think tanks, others are campaigning groups. But certainly there is more than 10 medium-sized active organizations who specialize in Europe in performing similar functions. Not another one in Poland. In Poland, I believe we are the only one trying to look at what state and private companies do when it comes to the use of data on individuals and society. It's quite important distinction, increasingly important for us to understand that even when there is no personal data involved, even when nobody takes as target an individual, the problem exists because as society we are also vulnerable, and also processing so-called big data, so statistical data about human beings, can be very problematic if if that serves, for example, discrimination or manipulation or any other negative function. So we have to look at both, and we try to look at both.
The desire to control information has, of course, been central to many state and large corporate organizations since time immemorial, really. And it's only recently that it's been put on steroids, or the ability to do so has been put on steroids with the advent of various technologies, which we will mention shortly. But really now I'd like to attack a certain argument which is rooted in false equivalence, really. And it has been put forward by the naive and by those in the employ of powers that be. And the argument is, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. Let's put that particular piece of nonsense to rest once and for all, shall we?
Well, it's even surprising for me that it keeps coming back after all media discoveries and stories that no longer focus on intimacy of people involved in surveillance, but look at power relations. So the shortest answer would be that you are not important as an individual with your very intimate secrets. These secrets, if they matter at all, they matter to marketers who try to sell us new type of soap or new drug or new solution, new magic solution for whatever problem there is. So indeed, there is context, quite old commercial context, that I don't think is so fearful for us anymore, where this personal seek and hide game, how much I reveal, how much somebody knows about me, really matters. But in a bigger picture, what matters is power, and the power to manage our opinions, to manage our lives, to manage our behavior, to influence our choices, consumer choices en masse, where my personal small secrets really are not that meaningful. So it's not hide and seek game at all. It's a game of manipulation. It's a game of shaping people's attitudes. And if we perceive surveillance, collection of data as a tool in that game, really hiding is not an issue. So indeed, if we wanted to address it, hiding anything online these days is very, very challenging. I've just seen somebody quoting a recent book about Google that has that piece of evidence, also new to me, that apparently every one out of 6 questions we ask to the search engine has never been asked by ourselves to anybody else. So we seem to be trusting more the algorithm behind Google search engine than we would trust a family member, a friend, or a therapist. It's a clever active choice, because we know that there are answers to most intimate, most surprising questions that indeed could surprise our friends or trustees. But I think it also has another aspect to it. There is also an aspect of trust. Somehow if we don't perceive that digital surveillance machinery as invading our privacy equally to how we would perceive a person in a direct conversation where you reveal your concern or you reveal your question. So looking from that perspective, yes, I do think that we leave traces online that are extremely embarrassing, and in that sense, everybody has something to hide. But this is not what matters in the game, as I said before. It is a game of power, where what is at stake is not so much marketing based on our sensitivities, vulnerabilities, a little or bigger secrets, but understanding who we are, understanding what motivates us, what is driving our life choices, consumer choices, political choices, and using this information to influence these choices.
So it's about a disparity, a lack of balance of power. Apparently, those who would sacrifice essential liberty in the name of security deserve neither the liberty nor the security, or so they say, said one of the American founding fathers. But that is a sweet, quaint, old-fashioned way to see this. I think security is not a state you reach, especially now. It is a process. What are those the building blocks of that process and that trade-off.
If I don't have control over information that describes me, if I don't have control over information I send and receive, I cannot control my life in the digital context, in the context that surrounds us. And that is, for me, the very source of the sense of insecurity. So there is really no trade-off in my head between specifically privacy, or as we like to put it, informational autonomy. I think that's a better term, and security. It is almost the same thing, or they are closely intertwined. I think it's a way of doing propaganda. It's a way of manipulating people's thinking, that fair trade-off, and posing it as such. It's almost like blackmailing people to say, choose what you prefer. I believe we don't have to choose. It is a package of protection that we deserve, both in relationship with the state and private actors. We deserve to be protected from threats like a pandemic.
We are recording this interview in the middle of COVID-19, and surveillance has been sold to us as a health protection measure. Is it even likely to be effective in the first place? And then once the health risk has passed, will broad-ranging surveillance stay as a default setting, ready for the next time we are hit with a pandemic, of course, which really shouldn't be too far away given the speed at which we are destroying natural habitats and encroaching on wildlife territories. But that's not the level of discussion that we should be having at all, is it?
Very true, and a recurrent argument that Panoptykon and other allies we have in Europe put forward in this debate is that, again, you don't have to choose here. Fortunately, it's not like, it's not that simple that if state knows more about us, it can protect us from pandemic, for example, in a more efficient way. In fact, I can imagine and describe solutions that help us fight pandemic that are absolutely privacy respectful. And even if certain intrusions on privacy or certain forms of collecting data are necessary, exactly by being necessary, they are also justifiable. So you wouldn't even, in legal terms, you wouldn't even call it privacy intrusion so much if there is evidence that the state or any other entity needs to know something about you to protect your other rights. So as lawyers, we are quite flexible with our what we call necessity test or proportionality test. We do appreciate the fact that sometimes collection of data is a necessary tool for performing certain public functions. The easiest example being when you go to hospital, you do reveal quite a lot in order to enable these people to help you. But you don't have to do the same, and the state does not have to do the same on a huge scale when it comes to protecting society. You will be better off as a state collecting big data, statistical data about population to understand what that population really does. So for example, understanding movements of people to manage the spread of virus is one thing, but knowing precise location of every single person is another thing. We don't have to do the latter to achieve the goal that can be done with the former. You can, with very limited trust towards public entities, you can demand absolute transparency, absolute openness of how these tools are designed. And that approach has been pushed by many advocates here in Europe. And initially it was even adopted or promoted by big technological companies, Google and Apple. Both companies at some point decided to support technological solutions demanded by the states by enabling a more efficient use of Bluetooth exactly for the purposes of contact tracing. And after saying they will help, they also declared full transparency, which later on was not confirmed. Right now,
well, you can't have full transparency unless the code is sitting in a GitHub repository,
exactly.
open to all to actually sift through it and see what's in there under the hood. Unless there is full transparency, there is no transparency.
I'm not convinced whether we can, whether that goal is achievable at all with technological tools. But one thing we can say for certain, if or unless majority of population installs this kind of app, it won't work. And we don't have a single case, I think, of a country, including Singapore, where that happened. So most likely none of these tools will work as planned. But the only way to convince people to risk this experiment with their privacy being one of the stakes is through trust. So if we cannot achieve trust with full transparency, because Google and Apple are not willing to put on the table code of that system that determines, for example, how data is anonymized, or how it can be or cannot be accessed by owners of the system, but we cannot verify that promise fully without seeing the code. And we won't see the code because both companies say that by revealing the code, they would have to reveal sensitive information about how their operating systems function, therefore creating new vulnerabilities. Catch-22, right, or a vicious circle that by increasing trust in one place, we might end up creating vulnerabilities and decreasing trust in another place. So if that cannot be achieved, if trust in this case cannot be achieved with full transparency, can we rely on professional organizations to audit it? For example, can we engage data protection authorities in Europe to check this for us? Can we trust our states that they will perform such audits and ensure that everything is secure and data is not collected beyond what is necessary? Well, this is an open question. If citizens do trust these institutions, I think it is also a way to go. It is also a way to feel safer, safer in this context. If you don't trust, like many Polish citizens don't currently trust Polish institutions for performing such protective function, then we end up in a serious problem.
But then we are creatures of habit. Once we're used to something, it becomes the default setting. And observers have commented that surveillance will be required over the next year or two. So once something is in place for this long, it will be the new normal. So the next time a threat comes along, there will be a ratcheting up of surveillance. This is not a process that we can very easily circumvent.
Very true. Yes, we have seen that dynamic in the past with the war on terror. Last decade or two gave us enough evidence that this creeping function of video surveillance, telecom surveillance, various forms of online tracking for terrorism fighting or child protection, or you name it, another goal purposes, likes to stay in place and exactly gaining new functions. So we have to be extremely careful as a society in what we accept. The thing with pandemic is that I don't really see how intrusive surveillance on individual level could help manage this particular threat. I would encourage every single person who jumps easily to thinking, yes, we need more surveillance to fight COVID, to question that shortcut in own brain and really try to find evidence why. Is what are the specific forms of surveillance we would be okay with in this very context. There is nothing dangerous in understanding patterns of how people search, how people communicate, what people discuss online. There is nothing evil in understanding patterns of our commuting, patterns of how we move or how we change our movements in the times of lockdown. And we can use these types of big data to understand better the threat and manage it better. But going really into people's phones, into people's lives, collecting individual locations, collecting individual searches, tracing individual interactions. This is another thing. Initially, states wanted contact tracing apps to perform individual level surveillance, to collect a lot of data about individuals. And that effort has been blocked by technological companies. Google and Apple said no, and by strong response from technological and human rights communities, where there is consensus that you don't have to go that far. You can easily achieve if at all. We said it before. If that thing will work, that's another question, really not for this discussion, because it's more the question for epidemiologists. But if you want to do it, if you want to establish whether person A met person B, you don't need identity of these people. You don't need location of these people. You just need the exchange or the trace that there was exchange in last 14 days of certain signal between them. And that's a very good example of how a technological tool used in the context of pandemic can be redesigned with protection for privacy.
We are doing this interview at a rather interesting time. Within a few days, Polish voters will be making their decision on who will hold the office of the president for the next 5 years. Since today we are concerned with the issue of privacy in relation to technology, it is interesting to note that your foundation has just lodged a suit against the Polish Post Office for mishandling of sensitive personal information of many thousands of voters. The requests for ballot papers that had to be mailed in, for those elsewhere who haven't seen these curious instruments, this was a piece of paper where you had to list virtually all of your personal information, and many of those requests for ballots were in fact lost or mishandled. Now, this is a nightmare because with this information, any self-respecting crook can get money from a loan shark, for instance, in the name of that person. And this is a country where identity theft is rife already. And here we have a state agency helping in that process. Now, let's not look at the suit since it is ongoing, but let's perhaps comment on the mindset required to allow for that state of affairs to exist in the first place.
Don't ask me about this mindset, because I'm not the one sharing it. I'm the one clearly surprised that these things can happen in a democratic state. Our motivation for that lawsuit is exactly to show that we disagree, that we still believe that GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation adopted on the EU level a couple of years ago, should protect citizens from exactly these kind of developments, in this case, unfortunately, led by the state, which makes our job far more complicated. It is actually the case where we have to confront the official watchdog organization, the official watchdog institution that should protect our rights, but won't do it in this case. I refer to the Polish Data Protection Authority, who already took a public position in this case, and declared that there was no breach of law, while basically every single data protection lawyer I know in the country says the opposite. We do think, and we do have legal arguments to support that claim, that this transfer that you described, this transfer of personal data between state institutions happened illegally without the proper legal basis. Yes, one could say that it is a formality, because cutting a long and complicated story short, it was a rushed transfer. If the state waited 1 more week or 2 more weeks, they would probably had the legal basis in place, because in the parliament controlled by the governing party, it's not a big deal. It's not very difficult to adopt a legal basis if you need one, but this does not really change the essence of the problem here. That state that can adopt the law if it needs legal basis to do such a transfer, B, can do such a transfer of data even without legal basis. I mean, both these scenarios are not very safe, exactly, for citizens. As a citizen, I feel extremely unsafe. I'm surprised by the fact that a postal office suddenly gains access to my, not sensitive in this case, but definitely valuable data that can be easily monetized or abused for theft or any other purpose. And postal office is not in a position to protect this data. That data was also transferred without any special security measures.
You touched on a point which actually goes far deeper into the relationship of individuals with technology. Because here we have a situation where there was really no technology. There was a piece of paper that was mailed in. But we are already faced with a huge part of many societies, most societies really, pretty much all, if you think about it, being excluded from the opportunities provided by digitization. I mean, the digital signature exists in Poland. Bank level security, you sign in with a unique identifier, you engage with a state agency or what have you. But this digital exclusion is one of the reasons why populism is gaining ground so rapidly. And now with quantum processing just around the corner and ubiquitous computing and the expanding Internet of Things, this process is progressing at a dizzying pace. For example, the French government wants to digitize 100% of the interactions which its citizens have with the administration, and wants to do it within 2 years. More than 250 tasks, from renewing a passport to lodging a tax return. But a third of French people have no idea how to use digital tools. So they're setting up a massive education and training program, in itself a job creation scheme, if there ever was one. But it really goes to point out the issues of digital exclusion. And they are intimately related with digital protection and access to data. They're all interwoven. How do you see this playing out Europe-wide?
Well, I'm not a big fan of pushing people to use technology as default, as you said, as something we are first forced to do and then used to do, so it becomes the new normal. We always argue, in relationship with the state, we always argue that there has to be alternative, non-digital alternative. I wouldn't go as far to say that paper is always more safe than digital. For example, in the banking context, I think we have gained more than we have lost by going digital. At least I see no way back. But for example, the use of cash, it's another good example where I'm fearful that as a result of pandemic, we will be trained even more to use electronic money only, also in this small transactions of everyday life, and we will start forgetting cash. While it could be used as important protection of our anonymity when we want it. But quite quickly we can imagine also the society in which the use of cash becomes suspicious. And everybody who does it is equally suspicious as a person using unregistered SIM card. I'm really allergic to this hype over technology as the solution to everything, including managing state and citizen matters in a more efficient way. I don't think this is the only way. Yes, there are certain areas where definitely data can be helpful. Again, we keep coming back to health-related examples for a good reason these days, but while I can easily imagine how big data plays a positive role in predicting diseases, in managing public money that goes or has to be invested in healthcare, I can imagine use of big data in, for example, designing efficient therapies. I don't think we need to digitize intimate relationship between doctors and patients, or I don't think we need more computers or machines inside of hospitals that will replace intimate relationship between carers, caregivers and patients. And in that same way, I think there are functions of a state, especially all these protective functions or functions where state is supposed to care care about its citizens and not surveil them precisely. I don't think we need to digitize all that and collect more data just because we have this trend. So what you have just brought up in this discussion, the digital exclusion that we still face as a barrier, maybe it needs to stay there. Maybe we should simply respect it, not fight it, not deny it, not expect that it will disappear with certain generations dying out and new generations being early adopters of technologies, but respect the fact that not every area of our life needs to be digitized in the first place. It is especially, I think, pertinent, that discussion in the context of AI. When we discuss AI, the use of artificial intelligence, we always start with what we call step zero in that debate. Why would you use AI at all? Why would AI be the answer to this problem if it hasn't been solved before by humans? In what way data or machine learning or any other aspect of this technology will be more helpful? If we cannot prove that, if we don't have good arguments here, we shouldn't even move further. While, as we all know, investors and public investors as well quite often move fast and forward, breaking things just because something is trendy, cool, and looks shiny and promising.
The thing, of course, is, in contrast to many technologies, many even digital technologies, AI is not inert. AI is an altogether different beast. This is not just another piece of technology. And we, the collective we, the human we, really have zero idea about what it is, what it does, and how to make sense of it.
It is a problem, although I don't think we are doomed to fail here. I don't think we are determined to crash with full speed against this wall. It is a myth, in my opinion, that AI cannot be explained, that AI cannot be effectively controlled, that we, in this huge social experiment, we have to learn the hard way. I don't think so. I really think that it can be still, that debate can be rationalized and filled with evidence. This is exactly the kind of work that Panoptykon and our allies have been doing for last 2 to 3 years, when that very problem has been at the center of our activity, our lobbying activity on the EU level. And there are positive results. If you look at today, if you look at guidelines coming from public bodies such as Council of Europe, or British equivalent of Polish Data Protection Authority, ICO, or European Union, Brussels-based institutions themselves, including European Commission, you see huge progress in understanding what can be asked, or what can be expected from the designers of this technology. I don't think we have to stick to that myth that explainability is there's a trade-off between explainability and effectiveness of this technology. I hear very different opinions coming from experts in the field. Just to give another example, last week Panoptykon published a thorough guidebook on AI for experts and non-experts in Polish. Maybe we will develop English version if there is need for that. That explains basic ideas, explains fights against recurrent myths in this area, but also explains explainability. I mean, explains what is at stake if we don't understand these systems, if we let these systems govern our lives or have influence on our behavior without understanding their logic, that we really cannot accept this scenario. But on the other hand, we don't have to accept it, because we absolutely can demand basic levels of explainability when it comes to how the system was trained, what the system is optimized to do, what are the operational goals inside of the system. So not only the overarching idea, but specific actions the system is supposed to perform. These elements can always be subjected to public scrutiny. The black box can only be used as excuse in this context. So I'm not here asking for the black box to be fully open. I don't think anybody here needs to understand, for example, how machine learning system detects patterns or recognizes patterns. That is a very complex thing. But even without understanding the system on this level, we can always question human decisions behind these systems, or human decisions that shape these systems.
Not the what and the how, but the why.
Specifically the why, but also the trade-offs. One thing that I've learned in my own process of studying AI is that there will be trade-offs. There are always trade-offs built in the systems, which can be framed as political decisions when we discuss, if we discuss systems used by public bodies. There are always political trade-offs involved. So for example, if you have a system meant to assist judges or meant to assist medical professionals in making serious decisions about patients or criminals or whoever victims of abuse, there will be always trade-offs when designing the system. What is the sensitivity of the system? What are the mistakes we want to avoid? And what are the mistakes we are ready to accept? And this is the type of discussion that has to happen in the open, in the public, because you end up making serious political choices that will affect human lives by accepting certain trade-offs. And you have to accept them because we are talking about statistics and maths. And in these two areas, there is always a margin of error. There will always be mistakes made by the system. So you have to decide which mistakes you accept, which you don't. You cannot just ignore the fact that they exist.
But then the systems learn from the mistakes, we hope.
There is, in theory, that these systems learn and become more efficient, but never perfect, because it is based on statistics, because it is based on big data. There's always a margin of error, which can mean a human life, can cost human life. So trade-offs cannot be avoided, from what I have learned, and the only way to live with them somehow, live with that fact, is exactly by ensuring transparency that we discussed before. I think for AI implementations that will exist, certainly in the public realm, in the realm where state performs its power on people, the only way is transparency. If we don't understand the system, if we cannot examine and question these trade-offs made by the designers, we are lost in the fog, and we are effectively not controlling that power. And we cannot afford this experiment.
So you are hopeful?
Determined to ask for change that I believe in, but whether I'm hopeful, I'm not sure myself. I don't think that we as civilization, we as a very complex system of humans shaped by technology, humans governed by state, humans governed by private corporations. I don't think that whole complex ecosystem goes in the right direction. And in that sense, I'm not very hopeful. I think we are going to crash a couple of walls in the next couple of decades, and it will be very painful process of crashing. I don't think that can be avoided, really, exactly like some sort of ecological disaster cannot be avoided. In the same way, technological disasters in front of us probably cannot be avoided, but maybe we can do something to make them less dramatic, or protect our rights better for this moment of crashing.
Perhaps we should end it right here. On that note, Katarzyna Szymielewicz, the co-founder of Panoptykon Foundation and an advisor on matters privacy, data security, and surveillance to bodies private and public around Europe.
Maybe it's more fair to say a critique than advisor these days.
If they're willing to listen, that's always a good start. Thank you for coming into our Boma. This has been a Boma Poland production in the Boma Global Studio series. And keep an eye out for more programs talking about issues that matter. Thank you for your time. My name's Ralph Talmont, and it's goodbye from Warsaw.